Thank you for joining us today for this webinar called Cheaters Beware, Appropriate Remote Assessments. My name is Samantha Eastman and I'm an instructional designer at Excite, UCR Center for Teaching and Learning, called the Exploration Center for Innovative Teaching and Engagement. Today we'll be hearing from CNAS colleagues in a discussion about approaches to equitable assessments, test building strategies, and ensuring academic integrity. The format for our webinar today will involve brief presentations followed by question and answer or discussion. Please hold your questions or contributions for the Q&A portion of the session or use the chat, and we can address your questions submitted once we reach the Q&A portion this afternoon. We have with us today Stephanie Dingwall, Assistant Professor of Teaching and Biochemistry, and Matt Castleman, Assistant Professor of Teaching and Chemistry. And I'll let Steph and Matt further introduce themselves as each of them gets started with the presentation portion of this session. Steph has agreed to go first, so take it away, Steph.
Great, thank you very much. Hello, everybody. I am Dr. Stephanie Dingwall, an assistant professor of teaching in the Department of Biochemistry, as Samantha said. This is my end of my 5th year, and I've been teaching remotely for the last years. So last, I would say, 4 quarters at this point. My presentation will be how to proctor remote assessments, and Dr. Castleman will follow up with the types of assessments. So we'll go in sequence. So with regards to today's topics, what I'm going to cover is, first of all, why would you want to proctor an assessment? Second, what I do in my courses. And third, what UJA and Zoom are, basically proctoring software. So one of the things that we have to consider is why you want to proctor, since one of the main things we do is actually teach. So why proctor? Well, it really depends on your assessment style, the content of your material, and a little bit of student conduct. So with regards to assessment style, one thing to consider is time. Will your assessments be a limited time or unlimited? Will it be within a particular day, or are you giving them a week, say? So that's one reason to consider proctoring or not. Another reason for proctoring is frequency. We have something called formative assessments, which are more frequent, perhaps every week or every 2 weeks or so. And these are units or chapters of material. Summative assessments are more like midterms, every 3 or 4 weeks, or even halfway through the course. And then a final, cumulative or not. So your assessment style may dictate whether or not you wish to proctor. Second, content. One thing about content is the types of assessments you might wish to give. Are you going to be favoring more memorization, what we call Bloom's Level 1, a sort of regurgitation of information or a plug and chug type thing? Or will you be favoring critical analysis? For example, more reasoning, more prediction, and perhaps essays. And that goes on to question style. The question style, multiple choice, short answer, calculations, versus, again, an essay, a drawing, or an upload. That may also help dictate whether or not you choose to proctor. And finally, student conduct. Many of the assessments that we have are actually already out and available to the students, not only on the internet, but also within various organizations. For example, fraternities and sororities may have these test banks of previous assessments, so that's something to consider. There are also sites which I'll briefly touch on later, for example, like Chegg, CourseHero, or Slader. Slader is one of the ones that are actually coming up pretty quickly, and it's less known as Chegg, or at least to faculty, but it's more well known to students because you can be more anonymous. And then, of course, there are group chats, for example, like Discord and GroupMe, that students use on a fairly frequent basis for multiple courses. So with regards to my courses, I teach about 7 different ones. I'm only going to talk about the 2 primary ones in which I proctor. A non-majors biochemistry course, which is an average of 300 students a quarter. Prior to the pandemic, when we were in person, there were 2 to 3 exams total and about 80 or 90% worth of their grade. So homework wasn't much. Whereas during the remote situation, I moved it such that homework is now a 1/3 as opposed to a 1/10 of their grade. So these assessments I still keep in the summative sense. So I do midterms, but the homework is more weekly. My non-majors course this quarter is primarily sophomores and juniors. It depends on the quarter because in the fall you have more juniors and seniors. In my major's biochem course, it's still fairly large at 100 to 200 students. The exams, I've considered moving it to 3 exams, but right now we've kept it at 2 because, again, in the increase in homework and the amount of, I guess you could say, unofficial feedback that the students get, no stakes in class. So again, I've reduced the amount of points for assessments by increasing the amount of point of homework, but it's still about a decent chunk of their grade. This is a primarily junior seniors class. And what I do is I do proctor my exams. I've tried it both proctored and unproctored, closed note and open note. And currently I use closed note assessments that are timed. Because one thing I've noticed, regardless of the type of assessment I give, this is what happens. Where sometimes students will all of a sudden send in a fairly long exam, but it's done in 7 minutes. And one of the things that I've logged is that some students will sign in perhaps 30 minutes after the exam started, but they've gotten the answers from their friends, and there you go. Fortunately, that's few, but it does happen. So what I do in my timeline, how I prepare for my proctored exams, first of all, I let the students know what to expect. So in their syllabi, basically, pre-course, I determined that I do want to do UJA plus an alternative, and that's very clearly stated in the exam section. About a week or 2 before the exam, I actually make a sort of frequently asked questions page. And in that frequently asked questions, I'm more than happy to share if anyone wants to see what mine looks like. I ask them, if this is their first time using a proctoring software like UJA, do a test run so that they're comfortable with it prior to the exam day. Then I make an announcement, contact me if I have alternatives, and they usually, I give them a deadline about 5 days or so before the exam as the day to contact me if they don't have access to a webcam, if they have other needs, etc. At that time, I also check whether or not the SDRC or Student Disabilities Resource Center has other needs for their students have needs outside of what we may have expected. And then I consult with my TAs with regards to processing, the protocol on exam day and afterwards. A couple of days before the exam, I follow up just to make sure everybody's on the same boat. I usually have a spreadsheet. You guys are probably thinking 300 students. Yes, but I just take my roster and then I make notes of which students have already told me they need an alternative. And then the exam day. So on the day of the exam, I sign into the lecture Zoom room about 10 to 15 minutes prior. Now, the majority of my students use UJA. When I mean by majority, I mean 90 to 95% of my 300-person course, which means 5 to 10% of the students may not have access to UJA or either don't have the software or hardware necessary. So I give them the alternative of signing in via Zoom, and I usually work it out with them. By signing in 10 to 15 minutes prior, I show this share screen. And these are my instructions. I modify it as necessary. But this is already sent out in the pre-exam announcement so they know what to expect. So they don't come in and start freaking out with all this stuff. And then after this happens, basically I cross my fingers and pray because there are always going to be technical issues. There's always going to be something at the very last minute. And I have contingency plans upon contingency plans. So now that I've explained a little bit about what I actually do, I'm going to explain more about what UJA is. So UJA is basically a repository, a proctoring asset, and a video conferencing software. You can do a whole bunch more, but it's available in iLearn and Canvas. A number of you may already be using it for your media, for your recordings, but the proctoring is what's nice about it. So how does it work? One of the options in UJA is that the students can proctor themselves. And as long as you open up the assessment or in Canvas or iLearn and give them the time and let them proctor it, they don't have to be in the Zoom room. So instead of say 300, 350 squares in a Zoom room, I've got maybe 20 to 25 because everybody else is on UJA. This is much more manageable to answer any questions the students might have. Basically, again, solve problems if necessary. There are instructions on the Excite website, but I've also developed a video that I make available to my students how to go through UJA proctoring. And again, I'll be more than happy to share that if anyone's curious. But one thing I highly, highly recommend if you wish to do this, make sure you activate proctoring in UJA for your course first. Otherwise, you won't be able to find that tab. Okay, and there are instructions how to do so. Now, pros and cons about using UJA as a proctoring milieu. One, actually, let me go ahead and answer the question. Is there a way to record the students' screens while Zoom proctoring? Unfortunately, with Zoom proctoring, there really isn't a way because their camera is going to be facing you. However, if their phone camera, you can position it such that you can position it to the side. Part of it is actually seeing their screen and part of it seeing their face. That's one way I've seen it do it on Zoom proctoring. So it's almost as if you were looking at your monitor and then have your phone say perpendicular to that, and you can actually see both. So I've seen that done. So pros and cons about UJA. Because UJA not only captures the student's face, but also what's on their screen, and that's a recorded video, you can actually scrub through based upon either your iLearn or Canvas logs if you have a question. The problem is, in that case, it doesn't flag the video. Pros, again, you can see the students, you can see the test taking screens. The con is it's not compatible with all hardware. For example, UJA doesn't work on Chromebooks. There's also a huge equity concern with regards to students, again, who may not have the either hardware or software to support this, because UJA is temperamental, I think, with El Capitan, with the Mac OS operating system. So that way we have them proctored via Zoom instead of UJA. So I always mention these to the students. If you have these types of hardware or software, please contact me. We'll figure out another solution. Okay. Now, with regards to another pro is that the video can be sent only to you. Since it's cloud-based, only you get to see it, or whoever you choose, either a TA, another instructor, etc. The con to that is it only goes to that one person. So unless you want to share it among the TAs, then it becomes a little bit of pain, but at least that one person gets to see everything. Another con is if the student chooses the wrong option, for example, record to your PC as opposed to start a proctoring section, then they keep the video. So they can share it with you after the fact, but it's no longer the cloud because it's a file on their device. Now, with regards to cheating, they're less likely to cheat. This doesn't mean they won't. They're just less likely to because they think they're being video recorded, which they are. But this can be stressful for the students. Common complaints include it's very big brother, it's very somebody watching over me. Some of the good students are saying, what if I look over to pick up my water and it flags me for cheating? I swear I wasn't. So there's that extra bit of stress. But in general, UJA makes the Zoom room much more easily handled because there are fewer students in Zoom that can ask questions. And so because of the pros and cons, I've weighed both. I've tried out UJA and I've been using UJA for the last 3 quarters, and there are very few glitches, fortunately. I would say it's been over 90 to 95% successful for my courses. So Zoom proctoring for those who don't have UJA. Zoom is my backup, as I mentioned. For those students who don't have UJA, I just say, please notify me before the deadline, 5 days before the exam, and then I reconfirm with them. Now, with regards to the protocol on the day of, it's as what I showed you before with regards to an announcement slide, etc. How I record this is at about 2 minutes before the exam starts. Because there's so few students in the room, I ask everyone to hold up their ID. I take a quick screenshot so I know who's there, and then that becomes my identification for it. And then during the process, during the exam, the TAs actually help proctor the exam, answer any questions in the chat. That leaves me free to deal with any technical difficulties. For example, students not accessing their exam in iLearn or Canvas, if they have poor Wi-Fi, etc., everything else. Now, are there other options post-exam? Yes, we'll talk about those. And the question is, are students able to contact the instructor or TA during the exam if they have questions? Yes. So if the students have questions during the exam, I say, by all means, you can log into Zoom. You don't have to, but you can also email us your questions. And that's when I handle all the quote technical difficulties too. So I make that available to the students. Fortunately, they're few and far between because they know they can come into the Zoom room if they want to. So just because they do UJA doesn't mean they can't go into Zoom. They still have the option to come into Zoom, and that's fine. So after the exam, I check my roster against the UJA videos, which are all present. In UJA, there's a folder called Proctor Sessions. You select the course, you select the date, and you'll actually see all the students there. It will also give you each video, again, a screenshot of their face, their screen, and the duration of time in which they took the exam. Then I review them as I wish. I basically sort of spot check as necessary. The problem is here, a lot of the times, and the students have actually told me this, they have ways to talk to each other how to quote cheat on online exams. They've got TikTok videos, they've got YouTube videos, Discord, whatever have you. And I unfortunately am familiar with a lot of these other things. And then students tell me how other students cheat. So there's still unfortunate academic misconduct occurring. And then after post-exam, I also look for my questions on the internet. Chegg is the big one. I just copy and paste one of my questions. I stick it in Google because Chegg has an app in where a student can actually take a quick screenshot, upload it on their account, and they get an answer sometimes in as few as, I kid you not, 15 minutes. It says 30 here, but I've seen it because it's happened. So this happens within, say, like an hour period. Even when I have my open note exams and I said, you have a full weekend to do this, open note, open friend, just don't Chegg it. My exam was on Chegg within 12 hours, even with an open resource. So it's just going to happen. The exams will be out there. So are there other options besides these proctoring things from UJA and Zoom? Yeah, Respondus Lockdown Browser, where you can actually lock the students into the exam so they cannot look at other browsers. The advantage is that it prevents them from looking elsewhere. The disadvantage, it's another software download, it's another whole heck of a tech, issue. Or no proctoring, which Dr. Kesselman will follow up with soon. So what I've learned in this case, the first time is rough. Obviously, the more you do it, the better it is. Most students are used to UJA by now because they've had it in most of their classes, but there's still these equity concerns that we have to be cognizant of. With regards to the assessment style, some students will just cheat and they'll pay for it. Chegg is a subscription, so they will pay for the answers. Most of the students are honest, hardworking students. When I mean most, I mean over 90, 95%. They were really good kids. I found out about some of my cheating incidents because the students reported it to me. So other times, I found them, but a lot of these kids are saying, hey, this is not cool. Just want to make you aware. And the last thing I've learned is that I really miss in-person teaching. And I think this will help solve a lot of the problems right now. So with that, thank you very much for your attention. I want to thank UCR Excite for all the resources they provided for both us as well as the faculty or the students, and my students really for sort of getting through all of this. The vast majority are fantastic and honest. So, and I have to thank Scape for finding the ones who aren't. So thank you for your attention.
Great, thanks, Steph. I think that Matt can get started with his portion now when you're ready.
Hey, there we go. Hi, my name is Matt Kasselman. I'm an assistant professor of teaching in the Department of Chemistry. And so I'll talk about my approach to what I've done this past year being online and how I've changed my assessment to maybe work a little better online. Oh, there we go. So here is the context for what I teach. So I teach Chem 8A and 8B. So these are really large lecture courses. I have 250 to 320 students per section of lecture. So this is what I usually look at when we're in person, but that's not what I get to see right now. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 50-minute lecture periods. I don't have discussion sections, and the lab course is separate. And so before we transitioned to remote instruction, I think I had a fairly typical assessment scheme. It was exam heavy. 85% of the total course grade was exams, made up of midterms, 2 midterms, and a final exam. How this worked is, I crammed them all into some of the big lecture halls on campus. It was proctored by TA, so TAs would walk around watching for eyes moving around. I scanned the exams. I used online grading with Gradescope, which I know Excite has hosted presentations on that in the past. So if you're interested in Gradescope, I'll mention it briefly towards the end and show you how I use it. But you can look up that old presentation as well. I do have some active learning in the classroom as well, which makes up about 15% of the total course grade. It says flipped Friday periods where they do an activity instead of a normal lecture. I learn quizzes to get ready for those flipped Fridays, as well as poll everywhere clickers. So pretty traditional assessment prior to COVID. And then COVID hit. And so the couple questions came up in my head. So I had this really exam heavy course. How do I make the exams? The first question was, how do I make these exams function online? Right. And so Stephanie went into that a lot. And I think, you can make these exams work online. We have technology that helps us along that route. But then I asked the question, are exams the best way to assess our students? Can we do something else that assesses our students as they are learning, but also ensures a high degree of academic integrity and just having a really high quality course? So I wanted to be responsive to student learning needs, especially as COVID hit. Online learning is hard. I remember back when I was in undergrad, I took a correspondence course. This was pre-internet days, and it was miserable. So I know remote learning can be very tough, firsthand experience. So I wanted to try and address that as I was redesigning my course and rethinking it. So I wanted to use more frequent assessment to keep students engaged. I think we've all experienced it now. Our students are spread thin. They're doing all sorts of things. They're taking care of family. They have jobs. They're trying to fit in school somewhere in that. We need a way to keep our students engaged. It's very easy for the students to set aside their schoolwork and then struggle later on because they haven't been frequently engaging with it. COVID-19 has been extremely stressful. As I mentioned, these students are having to pick up jobs to make ends meet for their families. They're taking care of their family members who are getting sick. They are taking care of their younger siblings who are now out of school or doing school at home. So somebody has to be there to help them stay accountable as well. So I wanted to reduce the stress in my class. So I wanted to use lower stakes assessment that was more frequent to reduce that stress. Right. And above all, I wanted to ensure that, we have a high quality education online. So that's why I decided to rethink my assessment plans. So what I came up with, and this is not what's going to work for everybody, was to take away some of the midterms that I knew were going to be difficult to implement online and instead use weekly homework. And so this became about 50% of their grade, which was the same proportion that those midterms were that were originally in my assessment plan. So this provided frequent opportunities for practice and feedback. I wanted to reward students for practicing and learning throughout the learning process, as opposed to simply assessing them at the very end of that process. Homeworks are going to be inherently open note, open book. They are learning as they are completing these assignments. So of course, they're going to have their resources available to them, including Google. I tell my students that collaboration is okay. You can talk to each other, but you can't just copy your friend's answer. That's not allowed, right? Chegg is not allowed. Buying answers online is not allowed. So I make that very clear at the very beginning that, the weekly homeworks are there to support your learning. Don't cheat. Don't buy answers. These are typically free response questions. I grade them. I collect them via Gradescope. They're TA graded, so I'm able to distribute them to the TAs. And then with the help of rubrics, they grade them. And I get really rapid feedback for the students. They get back their graded work within a couple of days. I'm not pushing the TAs to have to get it done, in a day, but I give them some time to get that done. Active learning is still there in my classroom. This is where I'm engaging the students both in and outside of class. Again, this is open note, open book. Collaboration here is encouraged. I want them to talk to each other. I want them to engage with each other in discussion. Typically, these are multiple choice questions, so either a quiz or a poll in class. These are automatically graded, so they get the feedback right away. And then finally, I have final exams. So I haven't done away with exams altogether. Still a big chunk of their grade. It's 35% of their grade, but this is the time for them to demonstrate mastery. I still keep it open note, open book. And so that might not fly with some folks, and that's okay. It's up to you to run the class, your own class, the way you like it. I do have to say this is where individual efforts apply. So this is where proctoring comes in, that sort of thing. Again, it's multiple choice questions. It's online proctored via UJA, which Steph talked about quite a bit. Multiple choice questions, I'll talk about how I've implemented that and how I also try and reduce cheating with that as well. So the weekly homework in Gradescope, question really quick. So the point of proctoring the open resource exam, yes, I just want to prevent communication between students during the exam. So I don't want to see them on their phone texting, or I don't want to hear or see the Discord app pop up on their screen as they're typing with each other or pulling up Chegg and all of that. Yeah. So weekly homework in Gradescope, I collect free responses, homeworks in Gradescope, so they're able to either type an answer. Because it's organic chemistry, they have to draw a lot of structures and label things. So I'm able to collect free response questions this way. You can see the rubric items on the right here. So students get the feedback so they can see what we gave credit to. So my TA has done a great job of inserting the images into the rubric this quarter. I think that's nice because the students can exactly see what was given credit. I don't have to post an additional key. They can just use Gradescope. Gradescope does have the option of not showing the rubric items. So if you just want to have students to have a score, that's fine too. In case you're worried about reusing questions, I rewrite a lot of my questions every quarter. So I'm not afraid of my questions being out there. My online exams, I've been using iLearn to manage these. It's self-proctored with UJA, so UJA, students are instructed to download UJA, be prepared to use that, submit a recording. Again, the vast majority of students don't have an issue with UJA. I think back the first quarter I did UJA proctoring was, I think, over the summer, and greater than 95% of the students had no issues, right? They were able to submit no problem. If anything, I think it's getting worse with time. I think maybe those summer students were maybe the more motivated students, and so they had the technology, and then come the fall and the winter, I started encountering students that maybe didn't have the up-to-date technology, who were not as excited about learning online or prepared to be learning online. So I ended up with a lot more people having issues. Like Stephanie, I use Zoom for technical support, so I keep it open. I put everybody into a Zoom room if they need to be proctored, and then I just sort of pop in and check on them once in a while. To minimize cheating or to prevent it as much as I can, I use a multiple choice question format, and I use the pool questions feature in iLearn. So every exam item, there are 2 to 4 questions that could pop up on the student exam. So every student gets a sort of a randomized exam. You can also shuffle the answers so that they can't just say, oh, number 2 is B. You can shuffle it around as needed there as well. So doing so, it's harder for the students to communicate because everybody has a slightly different exam. They'd actually have to start looking at the exact answer, the exact question and the exact answers. And if I'm shuffling the answers and they have multiple different questions, it's going to be hard for them to cheat in that period, as well as cheating on camera because they're going to be recording in UJA. Again, I said it's open note, open book, and that's because I try to focus more on conceptual understanding with the students. So I have more questions asking about analysis and application, fewer questions simply about remembering and understanding. I tell my students that it's open note, open book, open resource. So you can go to Google and you can Google things, but I tell them going to the Wikipedia page on carbon and reading that for an hour is not going to help them on my exam. Please don't do that. Right? If you want to use your note and use your book, make sure that those are your notes and you've looked at the book previously, because otherwise it's not a help, it's a hindrance. And overall, my average has remained similar to in-person exams. So my in-person exams are free response. There's not really any gimme points. So they range from students scoring near 0 all the way up to 100%. And on the multiple choice iLearn format, I have students who can score 100% on these exams, but I also have students that are down near 20%, which corresponds to simply guessing on every multiple choice item. So academic integrity, it's still going to be an issue, even if you're trying to de-incentivize students from doing it. By introducing lower stakes assessment, they're going to be less inclined to cheat because, oh, it's only worth a couple points. You shouldn't be cheating on this. Try and emphasize that homework is part of the learning process. And so cheating on the homework is you're not learning. So students start to see homework as beneficial for their learning. Chegg, Course Hero, Slater, I think is the new one. Your questions are going to get posted there. I would say you have to monitor it yourself. The easy way to do this is simply copy paste your question into Google, add the word Chegg at the end, and your questions will pop up. Just copy down those URLs into a spreadsheet, send it to student conduct, and they will help. So they're very adept at emailing Chegg or Course Hero and getting those taken down. You also get a log back for whoever asked the questions and whoever's viewed the questions. And so at that point, they are going to want to, go after these kids and have them, brought up on the academic integrity charges and go through the whole process there of whatever consequences they might impose upon them, or whatever consequences you would like to impose on them. The other thing I would say is that students are talking, right? They have Discord, they have GroupMe, very common that they are talking on there, and I don't discourage them from doing so. I know they're going to do it. It's anonymous. I can't really stop it. I just encourage them to use that as another way to communicate with their classmates, to discuss the material. For the most part, the students are pretty good about self-moderating on things like Discord. Sometimes they'll say, oh, I saw the answers on Discord. And, but the students who are running these things, I don't know who they are, but they're doing a pretty good job of moderating that and keeping that off of there. So some of them do a great job running these chat servers and encourages them to talk to each other and get better understanding of the material. They're always going to talk. So trying to go after students who are using chat servers seems like a losing battle because they are just going to figure out how to do it more anonymously and to avoid detection. Yeah, that's all I would say there. And yeah, that's what I have. I would just encourage everybody to think about how you can change your assessment, maybe to, instead of trying to beat the students at the cheating game, trying to de-incentivize students from cheating, at the same time maybe improving how you're assessing your students in your class.
Great, thanks, Matt. I guess we can open it up to questions and discussion now. So does anyone have any questions or contributions? Go ahead and feel free to unmute yourself.
I have a question, if you don't mind. One thing that I'm teaching a class right now that is asynchronous, so there is no specific class lecture time, and I've sort of did a Hail Mary this quarter and didn't use any proctoring services at all, because I also it's a cross enrollment available ILTI class, so I have at least one student, if not more, from UC Irvine, so we can't use UJA, because Irvine does not have a, they don't have iLearn or anything like that, or UJA there. So I don't know if there are some best practices for how to proctor or ensure honesty on exams that, pretty much I open up the exam for a 24-hour period and students have 40 minutes to take it during that 24-hour period, but I can't really tell them when to take it because there's no specific class time. So I can't assume that the 200 people in my class all will have one time during the day when everybody is free. Does anybody have any thoughts about how to handle exams on these asynchronous classes?
One of the things that I've heard with regards to best practices on asynchronous is that basically have a variety of questions, have a question pool such that the students are less likely to have the same question. Because very frequently what would happen, unfortunately, is that sometimes a student gets sent as a sacrificial goat. And once they see what types of questions are on the exams, then they go ahead and report back. But again, that tends to be the minority, fortunately. I wouldn't say this would be the majority of the students at all. But having a question pool, and especially with limited time, can only allow them to report back for so much. But that's the best practice I've seen, is just mix it up a little bit.
Okay. And so have you ever run into equity issues where students complained, oh, well, my friend got easier questions than I did, that kind of thing?
I personally haven't, because I make very minor modifications and the questions are all pretty much the same. Perhaps a change of phrasing, a not becomes yes here, or a change in a molecule, something along those lines, where all you're really doing is just the skeleton of the question is the same and you're just changing very specific parameters. So they're going to be equivalent all the way through.
Okay, so kind of a step beyond just pure randomization of the of the same questions. You can randomize the order of the questions and you can randomize the answer order as well, but this takes a little step further and turns it into either a not question or a yes question. Okay, that's clever. All right, thank you.
The other thing you can do is in iLearn, you can run item analysis on your exam after it's complete, just to double check that maybe there's a question that was especially challenging for the students or was worded strangely that threw students off. And so if you see that type of question there, you might consider going in and maybe adding partial credit, or simply, I've had exam questions that were just didn't work. And I was like, well, I can't use that for assessment, so I'm just going to exempt that question from the exam and deal with it that way.
Excellent, thank you.
I want to point out also that with UJA, students don't necessarily have to do their proctoring recording session at a designated time. They can do it any time, as long as you've enabled the proctoring for your course through the course link. So when you access your UJA account through the course link, you have to turn it on under users and groups to enable proctoring for the course. And then they can initiate a proctoring recording anytime. And we really capitalize on that for some instructors who want to give their students an opportunity to practice being recorded through UJA while they submit like a practice exam assignment or take a practice test while practicing being proctored through UJA. So you can leverage that capability for them to do it at any time using the practice capabilities. And I see we have a couple of hands raised, so I want to take Teresa first, and then Yenna. Go ahead, Teresa.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on David's question. You can also do in iLearn or Blackboard is you can categorize your questions by difficulty. So what I've done in the past is I've had a test with actually combining several pools, a pool for easy questions, a pool for medium questions, and a pool for hard questions. And then I set the test so that it's going to draw, 3 of the easy questions, 2 of the medium questions, and 1 hard question. So that way you minimize that problem of having difficult questions if somebody's test got like 5 of the easy ones and somebody else got 5 of the hard ones.
Great, thanks for pointing that out, Teresa. Yana, would you like to go ahead?
Yeah, I want to thank both speakers for their very useful presentations. So I did try UJA in, I think it's last fall with Samantha, and Samantha helped me a great deal, but still it was very difficult. So I actually have some questions. I think I heard one of you two say that the students are quite used to using UJA. I do not seem to get the sense in my department. Number 2, Professor Dingwall, when you were presenting, you said that you asked students 1 or 2 weeks ago about whether they have enough equipment or something. I remember it took me a long time. I actually started very early. Even within 5 weeks, they still couldn't get all the equipment available. We were directing them to, long equipment or something. I even had to contact that unit and try to help individual students. But this equity issue and just the lack of sufficient technical help, I'm not talking about so much of our own university's problem, but it's just that some of the students are really using very different models, and I found it very difficult. So and then, I'm in the humanities, I'm in the department, I teach classes where I would give them show answer questions and essay questions very rarely. I noticed that sometimes it's multiple choice questions are not necessarily the best, but I think it varies in different disciplines. So my question is really exactly how comfortable students are with UJA and whether you can only give them so little time, just a couple of weeks, to get everything ready to go. I actually had to ask Samantha to come to my class to demonstrate how to use it because students were having problems. Some of the problems that you pointed out were already there. And I have to say that I was so stressed out by that class. Later on, I would not use it. I revert back to the Zoom proctoring, which is really inadequate. But then I have no other choice, just because of all the difficulties. And I have to say that setting up exams in Ireland or even quizzes, the tests options and it's already complicated enough. I have asked Samantha so many questions. It's very difficult, and even limit of time. And I do proctor all my quizzes and tests and exams, but I know that quite a few of my colleagues decided just not proctoring. So I really have a lot of problems with this aspect of remote instruction the most.
Thank you, Yana. Those are excellent points, things I've had to deal with also, especially in my first quarter using it. One of the things I do in my syllabus, along with exam protocol, is also I put a small section right under my textbook for hardware and software requirements. So for example, in this class, you will need, this hardware, this software. So day 1, they know what to expect, basically. And the syllabus is usually available about a couple of days to a week before the class. And then I talk about it on the first day of class. I also tell them, if you know day 1, you may not have access to this, please contact me immediately. So they do have plenty of head warning, as opposed to a week before. But even so, the students, I will probably get emails the night before an exam say, hey, everything was set up, my computer died. What do I do? And that's where the Zoom proctoring as a contingency plan comes in. And so basically having the expectation set, like this is going to be the proctoring we're going to be using. But if you can't, that's okay. We have this sort of alternate option. One of the concerns that came up with Zoom proctoring even is that a lot of the kids, more than expected, don't have enough data on their phone for a intensive program like Zoom. Like it just costs money just to use data, and I'm cognizant of that as I'm writing my exams. How long are these going to take? Am I going to write the whole exam that'll take 50 minutes or 120 minutes or something, or is it going to be doable in that time? Because I know they're already stressed out in doing an online assessment. And so I sort of take these into consideration, and by putting them in the syllabus as expectations, they can contact me ASAP. But I also made what's the word? A guide to UJA, like a small video for my students. This is how to log on to UJA. This is how to start your exam proctoring session. And it's about a 4-minute video that I actually make them watch as part of an assignment. So they know to watch it and they know how to access this. And this is made available to the students about a week or 2 ahead of time. I'm more than happy to, share that with you if you want to email me, and I can share to everybody what I do for the students so they can watch it, so they know what to expect.
Yeah, thank you. But is it really true that most students are now using UJA? Can someone answer this question?
I think it really depends on maybe CNAS is more adept with UJA, and we're using it on a wider basis between lots of classes. So if students have a lot of classes that use UJA, they become comfortable with it. If your class is the first time that they're encountering UJA, yeah, they're gonna panic and they'll be like, oh my gosh, how do I get this figured out? It's a lot. This is gonna be very stressful for them. So that's where the resources on the Keep Teaching website, or if you can develop your own, as Stephanie has done, it's a good idea.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tiana, for your question. I want to point out before we take Ward's question that there is a UJA faculty resource support course that you can self-enroll into through the Keep Teaching website, and I'll put the link in the chat. Go ahead, Ward.
I just wanted to start out by thanking Steph and Matt for the nice presentation. It's very nicely done. And then I'm just going to make a couple of comments. The first, has to do with the degree of cheating that's going on. I used to think that it was down around the 4 or 5% level. Maybe it isn't in person, but it seemed to be a lot higher in the online environment. I noticed in the summer when I first started teaching online, I generated, my exams had unique questions. So every student got a completely unique exam. And I found about 25%, maybe even higher than that, of the students had posted those to check during the exam. And so, and of course, all of those students were prosecuted. So it was a large number of students, and that's just check. Who knows how many were communicating amongst themselves. With UJA, so then I switched over to UJA. And the other thing is, under those scenarios where I didn't have any kind of proctoring, but I did have unique questions, my distributions looked really crazy. They were very unusual compared to my in-person exams. So then I switched over to UJA, and I had some concerns. For example, if you look at the video on UJA, all you see is kind of this part of the person up. So there's no way of actually being able to tell if they're texting on their phones and stuff like that. However, I found that it's an incredible deterrent. Okay. And so ever since I started using UJA, my distributions look normal. They look just like what I used to get. And I've noticed, so, occasionally, you can intercept these links to their Discord sites and GroupMe sites. And I've gone onto those sites during my exams and during other faculty's exams. And I've noticed that, when I was not using UJA, they would be using that site to exchange information and post answers on my exams. Okay, and I couldn't identify them. Whereas when faculty, and a lot of times they set these sites up so that when you have multiple instructors for a given course, they all are on that same Discord site. So I can then look at other faculty who were using UJA and they were silent. Okay, so it's a tremendous deterrent, even though it's a very it's not very effective really at catching cheaters. I mean, it's that's been my experience with that. So, and then the other thing I do with UJA is something very similar to what Steph does is on day one of class, I tell them that there's a mock, I have a mock exam up and that they need to try their technology out with UJA. And so that's right on day one, so that by the time the midterms come along, they presumably have sorted out their problems with technology. And there's lots of instructions on how to solve those problems, including, if they have a Chromebook or something like that, to contact the Learn to Learn program and get the technology that works. And usually with that, I end up with only 1% maybe who need an alternative, like 1 or 2 students maybe who, I have to proctor via Zoom or something like that. Anyways, those are my comments.
Thanks for sharing, Ward. Does anyone else want to talk about their experiences or comment on what Ward had to say? I think it's interesting that you pointed out the difference in distributions in scores for students taking UJA with remote assessments than in person. Is anyone else experiencing that or have any possible explanations?
If possible, I'd actually like to add comments about the Discord and GroupMe. So because the students actually use Discord quite a bit, they post their link and they do it for multiple courses. They can be in 3 Discord channels for 1 quarter based upon what classes they're in. They're always on it. I've found in general that I have a discussion board, with Canvas. They use Piazza. They talk more about the material on Discord because they just have better access to it. It's better, easier use on their phones, etc. But if you tell them, hey, I know you guys have a Discord, just make sure you don't talk about the exams. I've noticed they sort of self-proctor, like Matt was saying. They self-police a little better. They're like, oh, okay. Yeah, we know exists. They know that we're on it, but okay, we're not going to throw fits. And I've actually had students come back and say, okay, we've made sure not to tell the kids not to talk about the exam for the next couple of days, or, because it's really natural for kids to just compare notes after the exam, even though you've told them sort of, please don't talk about it, because kids talk. But it was surprising to me that the kids will actually help enhance your teaching, enhance your control of the class that way too. So it's a little bit of classroom management and unspoken benefit, provided that, the Discord exists and you're like, okay, fine. But anything that's course related, please do post on our discussion board. So just to give you a heads up, Discord's more prevalent than we might think.
Steph, I found the same thing with my students. So I let them Discord all they want. I encourage it, in fact, if it reduces the email load on my end to ask each other questions. And I have had students report, when they break my one single rule of like, don't collaborate on the exam. Otherwise, you can just let me know if you did homework together, put the names of your collaborators on the homework. So it's like citing your collaboration in your sources, but they will, let me know if they see academic integrity violations in there. So just to second your point, I think that is true.
That was my experience with Discord as well. I think what was it? Spring or first quarter online. Somebody put the Discord link out into the class chat on day one. I clicked on it. I made an account. They recognized that I was in there. They gave me some special title. I didn't really monitor it all that much. I logged in once in a while and was like, hey guys, I see things that shouldn't be on here. Please get rid of them. And whoever the students were who were moderating, they moderated it. They deleted it, which is great. Heck, I even asked them the day before the exam, can you turn off the Discord server, like disable it for during the exam, the day of the exam? They turned it off. I mean, I'm sure that there are things that I don't know about and they're like all talking in the background anyway, but they do self-organize very well, and it can be useful as part of the teaching and learning experience. So I wouldn't go so far to just discourage it altogether. It can be useful.
Great, thanks. We still have a few minutes left for any additional questions or contributions. I have been putting some links to resources at Key Teaching and other sites in the chat. Thanks, Teresa, for adding that on TA resources.
I just had a quick question, or maybe a clarification. So is it possible to screen capture multiple students using Zoom? I mean, if you're Zoom proctoring them, is there a way of capturing their screens? They have to download separate software for that and then send in the file separately. Is that how that's done?
You mean their actual test, the websites that they're visiting?
Yeah, well, their screen, so you know what they're actually doing on their computer. I mean, the Zoom captures their face, of course, but
it's a little bit more difficult for screen capture, especially if they're in a Zoom room, because you'd have to have multiple shares. You can have multiple participants share, but then that means everyone gets to see each other's screens.
Right. So yeah, that doesn't work.
So one thing that I've actually had some students do, they'll actually record it on Zoom and then sort of share that recording with me. So they'll be screen sharing. They're recording their own thing. They're sort of screen sharing and recording their own screen on a separate sort of an account. And then they share it with me so I know exactly what's on their Zoom screen. I've had maybe about 2 to 3 kids every exam or so do that and share it to me via the Google Drive. So it mimics UJA, but they're not necessarily in the Zoom room. Having said that, you can be in 2 Zoom rooms simultaneously, provided you're not the host of each. So the students could logistically do it. I had one kid do it this quarter and one kid do it last quarter. So it's a little bit harder logistically, but it is possible. Yes. And I can send you the instructions on how they did that too. But basically, they're in one Zoom room, they're being recorded, but in the separate Zoom room that they're the host of, they can record their own screen as they share it, and then they share that file with you via Google Drive. Mm-hmm. You just have a whole bunch of files. That's the only thing.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah, I would recommend using UJA if you want both the student and their screen being recorded. I think we have time for one more question. Yana, would you like to go ahead?
Well, I was actually thinking the time's up, but I was surprised that Professor Dingwall was actually talking about using Zoom proctoring almost like UJA proctoring. Well, in any case, my question is actually about UJA. So when it's done correctly, am I right? It would take a recording of the student's ID, and then it would have the student's face on the corner. But then I have gotten recordings before when there was none of the, neither of the two. So in that case, I wouldn't even be able to know who is taking the exam, whether it's the student herself, himself, or someone else. And actually, there are things that we didn't talk about. That is about paper writing, for example, or even take-home exams. Very often, we do not know who is the one writing it. It may not get any plagiarism check, even with the Ireland safe assign. And I mean, it may pass that. And actually, I have difficulty, for example, with the Chinese answers, essays, that I know that it's plagiarizing, but then I wouldn't even find it. I mean, my type of class and testing and assessments have many more problems that cannot be easily solved. So I was wondering about your experience in UJA, whether you have also had these cases when the students' face is not there, not recorded.
I've had a couple of those. Sometimes UJA glitches, and sometimes the uploads are not immediate. So they may take, for most students, about 5 to 10 minutes after the test. Some students, their uploads wouldn't go at all until either 8 hours later or ever. And then in your UJA, you'd see, 3 days ago, and the wheel's basically still spinning. So there are minor glitches in UJA, absolutely. It's just in general, there's so few. So if it happens to 2 or 3 out of my 300 kids, 1%. What usually happens with those students is in my exam FAQ, I say, if you have any issues with UJA, please email me immediately. And so I usually get a lot of emails after the exam saying, it didn't take my picture. Here's a picture of my ID. Here's me taking it. And I make a note of the students that have these issues, but usually the students are fairly forthcoming with the issues they've got. And they're fairly proactive, fortunately. But yes, I agree with you. There are definitely glitches. I blame remote teaching, the gremlins that are remote teaching, but we do the best we can.
Thank you.
Great, thanks everyone. I really appreciate you coming today, and the session was recorded, and we'll explore avenues for making it available to you with our website redesign. Yeah, thank you very much, and I appreciate your participation. Thanks, Steph and Matt, also for presenting.
Thanks, Samantha. Thank you, everybody.